Welcome to ILTV Weekly. I'm Steve Leibowitz, and with me today are former Knesset members Dr. Einat Wilf and Danny Ayalon. This week we will continue looking at some of the emerging details in the Netanyahu graft case. But first, we will have a look at Sunday's vehicular terror attack in the East Talpiot neighborhood of Jerusalem. 4 soldiers in officer training were killed when a terrorist driver from the nearby neighborhood of Jebel Mukaber drove his truck into a group of soldiers gathered at the Jerusalem Tayelet Outlook. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Liban arrived to inspect the site only hours after the attack, and this is what the Prime Minister and the police spokesman had to say.
אנחנו פה לאחר פיגוע טרור אכזרי וטרגי שבו נרצחו 4 חיילי צה"ל, 3 חיילות וחייל. אנחנו יודעים את זהות המפגע. לפי כל הסימנים תומך המדינה האסלאמית. שמנו כתר על ג'בל מוקבר, שכונה שממנה הוא יצא, ואנחנו עושים פעולות אחרות שאני לא אפרט כאן. אני בא עכשיו מדיון עם שר הביטחון, הרמטכ"ל, ראש שב"כ ואחרים, לגבי הפעולות המתבקשות. אנחנו יודעים שיש פה רצף של פיגועים, ובהחלט יכול להיות שיש גם קשר ביניהם, מצרפת וברלין, עכשיו בירושלים. אנחנו נלחמים בנגע הזה.
We've heightened security in and around in Jerusalem in order to make sure there won't be any further terrorist attacks. We're not talking about thousands, we're talking about hundreds of police officers in and around the different areas.
Well, Danny, let's start with you. The Prime Minister seemed so quick to announce the connection of this seemingly spontaneous terrorist attack and Islamic State, even connecting the dots between recent attacks in Nice and Berlin. Does that sound about right to you?
Well, that certainly is not inconceivable, and the fact that they have the identity, and they had already a meeting with the head of the Shabak and all the intelligence branches, I believe that his information is grounded and well-based. And
that he was influenced maybe by the propaganda of ISIS, as maybe many thousands are all over the Middle East.
Absolutely, but we know also that ISIS is trying to build sleeper cells, and even beyond that. We know that they're doing it on the southern border in the Sinai. We know that they're trying in Gaza and also in the West Bank.
You think that he might have been part of a sleeper cell, or is this just a guy that is angry and decided to use his truck?
It could easily be that he was just influenced by ISIS propaganda or Islamist propaganda, and for that matter also Palestinian Authority propaganda by glorifying all these terrorists and let alone Hamas influence. But I think what the Prime Minister referred to, and I think correctly so, is that we do have here a network. Maybe there is no hierarchy. Maybe there are no, let's say, official connection. But there is an agenda, there is a movement, there is an ideology, there is this incitement, and whether it's a lone wolf or not, it's all part of the same stream.
Einat, I lived in the neighborhood of East Talpiot for many years, right across the street from Jebel Mukaber, the town where this terrorist drove out of. And it always seems strange to me that this village, which is no different really than hundreds of West Bank villages of Palestinians all over the territories, is considered part of Jerusalem. And there are many villages like this, so that this driver has yellow license plates, he has an Israeli ID card, he had no problem driving into Jerusalem, and really he could have gone anywhere in Israel. Isn't there something fundamentally wrong with the boundaries of the city of Jerusalem today?
Absolutely. After 1967, it was a fateful and, in my view, deeply erroneous decision to create Greater Jerusalem through the annexation, not just of the old city, which could have been justified, but dozens of Arab villages around it, creating this massive city that has since become untenable, poor, mismanaged. I mean, this decision literally ruined the city of Jerusalem from the moment it was before 1967 and the slow process of deterioration after it. I don't think we need an awful attack in order to realize what a bad decision it is. You need to go through the dirty streets of Jerusalem to see how poor the city has become, to realize what a terrible decision it was. And I genuinely believe that Israel would be wise to go back on that decision, to establish new borders for Jerusalem, municipal, and to say, look, we have claims to the old city, to a few sites next to it, but nothing beyond that.
Let me ask you about that, Dani. Certainly East Talpiot we want to keep as part of Jerusalem, Gilo, Ramot, Pisgat Zev, all of these other neighborhoods that are part of Jerusalem that are filled with tens of thousands of Jews in each one. What would be the problem, political problem, to gerrymander the boundaries once again and get rid of villages like Jabal Mukaber, build a wall, and prevent these kind of terror attacks physically from happening? Plus, we wouldn't be paying Social Security and all of the other benefits that these people get, voting rights and so on.
Well, I'll tell you, Steve, I don't think that we should look at it like with a tunnel vision. I think it's a much broader issue from a strategic point of view, because if we do that right now, especially under terror attacks, then it's really rewarding terror. And the next thing is that the terrorist would attack Kiryat Arba, and then we'll say, well, why don't you gerrymander Kiryat Arba or Hebron and other places? The only way to get into the final status or even a long-term interim is through bilateral negotiations and understanding. We know that if you take unilateral steps right now, you just encourage more violence like we did in Gaza, for instance. So at this point of view, I'm not saying whether it's a good thing to have Greater Jerusalem or not. This is something that we will have to put in context with the entire Palestinian problem and how we do it with a holistic view about future borders.
And now, would you be worried about a unilateral decision in Jerusalem changing the boundaries?
Changing the boundaries? No. I'm very clear that the military will have to stay around Jerusalem in the West Bank for a very long time until the Arab Palestinians finally cease fighting Israel and are willing to accept the Jewish people as their neighbors in this land. But I don't think that in this process we need to also govern their lives or be there, or certainly not make them part of Israel. And for Jerusalem to redraw its municipal boundaries, I think that would be a wise decision for us and for the city of Jerusalem, regardless of any final status negotiation.
Dani, we all saw the video, the closed-circuit video camera that showed soldiers running away at the beginning moments of the attack. Of course, other soldiers and a civilian guard were busy shooting and killing the terrorists, really within moments. But and there's been an investigation that says that the soldiers basically behaved correctly. There were those that were claiming that there's kind of an Elor Azaria syndrome of soldiers being afraid. Did you feel that that was the case?
Not at all. In fact, I don't think that any of the soldiers did claim that any of his activities or actions were influenced by the Azaria's case. I believe that, revisiting the case, they realized that most soldiers did act correctly or as what is expected from IDF soldiers, never mind that they were not combat cadets, but administration or logistical units, which are not front units. But in any case, I think they did act correctly by and large. And we have to remember, in such a situation where there are so many soldiers, the most important thing to do is to make sure that there is no friendly fire.
They're not shooting each other. If 300 soldiers suddenly opened fire, there would be casualties of our side.
One thing I think that some soldiers did point out, that they were not briefed, or there were no training or any protocol or drills about attacks like that in a civilian area or in a downtown cities. I think this is something that probably should be revisited, and more, I would say, more instructions or more guidance should be given to soldiers, either when they are away on leave, because we know that in some cases before, soldiers who did have weapons on leave did not use it correctly. So certainly this issue should be revisited by the military.
And now there was something that took place yesterday when we were burying these 4 soldiers, 3 women soldiers and a male. The salt of the earth. I mean, these are officer training people, several different cities around the country. Not one minister made it his business to attend a funeral. Is that acceptable?
Of course it's not. And when I was a member of Knesset, these things happened several times. And I remember saying a few times, because there are several ministers and several members of Knesset, what we need is for the Secretary of the Government and for someone in the Knesset to be sure that whenever there is a funeral, certainly of the soldiers, victims of attack, they are responsible for making sure that there is official representation of the government and of the parliament in these events. We cannot have it be the individual business of every minister and every member of parliament because they never know who is doing what. So I think it is high time that there would be someone who would make sure that ministers and members of parliament are present at such events and would coordinate it so that there's no situation such as this.
Yeah, Danny.
Well, I remember in the government that I was a part in, that was the second Netanyahu government, 2009 to 2013. It was the cabinet secretariat or the cabinet secretary who would divvy up the work. So for every whether it was a ceremony, whether it was a festivity, whether it was, of course, funerals, there was a duty and there was a roster who goes where and when. Maybe there is some, I know there was a rotation and replacement of the cabinet secretary. Maybe the new one doesn't really have the experience yet, but certainly there should be guidance. They should be the ones managing and sending the ministers to the different places that they need to be.
All right, we're going to take a sharp turn now to the other issue that we want to deal with today. So the Israeli public is being treated to a new dose of alleged graft allegations that have been laid on Prime Minister Netanyahu and his family. A partial list of allegations: Australian businessman James Packer providing gourmet meals to the Netanyahu household in Caesarea and flights and hotel stays for the son Yair. Filmmaker Arnon Milchan allegedly sending regular deliveries of boxes of cigars to Bibi and pink champagne to Sarah. Apparently, businessman Ron Lauder buying his friend, the Prime Minister, expensive suits. And in a separate investigation, Yediot Achronot publisher Arnon Moses and the Prime Minister allegedly negotiated more favorable coverage for the Prime Minister if he would convince his billionaire friend Sheldon Adelson to cut back distribution of his Israel Today newspaper. Are you surprised, Danny, disgusted, unmoved, indifferent to the alleged actions of the Prime Minister?
I don't think anyone can be indifferent to these revelations. I hope that things could be well explained, because right now, on the face of it, it doesn't look good, it doesn't smell good, and certainly should be investigated. And I'm glad that.
I mean, they're talking about $400,000
yes,
worth of receipts just from the one case.
Right. So I would say whether it was timely or not, better late than never. Once the Attorney General decided to go into it and start an official investigation, and as such, the Prime Minister has to go and answer all these questions under warning. Hopefully we will have a good explanation, and if not, I think the public, if it's not indictable, I mean, this is one issue if it's indictable. If not, I think it's a public issue, and the public, I think, has to say its word.
You know, we're not lawyers, we're not judges, but we are citizens and we pay our taxes. Is this any way for our leaders to behave? I mean, we've had so many indictments of mayors, of ministers, of a president, and of prime ministers. In fact, is this any way for our leaders to behave?
Certainly not. And what I think should change also legally, not just in the public element, is that the whole notion of bribery and graft should change, not to looking at real benefits, but access. I think it should become clear that the time of politicians is public time. And if they're providing their time disproportionately to people who have given them things, that time in itself should be considered the bribe, should be considered the value. Because in today's world, access to power, access to politicians is extremely valuable.
But individuals have rights to have friends and to give gifts to friends.
But this is not what we have here. And all of these people are so-called friends only because these are people in power. And by the way, the gift given is not both ways. You don't see gifts being given in the other direction. What is being given in the other direction, even if it's not direct contracts or benefits, is access. It's the ear of the prime minister. The ear of the prime minister, that's a valuable real estate. People are vying for access to it. The fact that through cigars and champagne and whatnot, you can get access to that real estate, that in itself should be considered the bribe that was given. And politicians would need to prove not only that they did not give something in return, such as a contract, but that they did not disproportionately spend their time with people who have given them all these gifts.
Danny, the second case, the alleged collusion between Netanyahu and Yediot Ahronot editor Arnon Moses, maybe it's more disturbing even than the first, because these two men, very powerful men in the country, maybe two of the most powerful men in the country, were allegedly discussing the possibility of Yediot giving more favorable coverage to the prime minister, and in return the prime minister would get his friend Sheldon Adelson to cut back on the circulation of his free newspaper, Israel Today. Now, just the fact that Netanyahu was negotiating, and apparently there are many hours of tapes about this, he was negotiating on behalf of Israel Today, isn't that in itself something that's very disturbing?
The short answer is yes, and I would say there are two issues here. The one, as you mentioned, if indeed he was negotiating on behalf of Israel Hayom, then that means that not only he has access, but he has some, let's say, some business connection. There is a give and take here. And in that case, when Israel Hayom, and we know the cover is very flattering for the prime minister, this could easily considered now as a elections bribe or political bribe. We know, for instance, that, and it's not inconceivable, and one could go back and say that when the prime minister was against legislation that would limit the power and distribution of Israel Hayom, that could be on behalf of Israel Hayom. So if he negotiates now with the rival paper, Yediot Ahronot, and with this very, very, let's say, powerful publisher of this, that could be also a collusion between two of the main media outlets or newspapers. So this is the first issue. The second one is that as Minister of Communication, which the Prime Minister holds this portfolio, that means that he oversees all the regulation vis-a-vis media, vis-a-vis newspapers as well. So any connection, any give and take, any discussion between the Minister of Communication and any of this media outlet should be very much concerning all of us.
Einat, in fact, just today, the leader of the opposition, Isaac Herzog, decided to, he threatened to go to the Supreme Court and demand that the position of Minister of Communications be taken away from Netanyahu because of this conflict. Do you agree with that move?
That is probably correct, yes, if that could work. I mean, it's the kind of thing that kind of everyone knows. Everyone knows that Israel Hayom serves the prime minister. Everyone knows that the prime minister is involved in setting the editorial line of this newspaper. But as long as it wasn't in the open, there was a pretense that that's not the case. And therefore, the prime minister can be the communication minister. This was not considered up until now to be election money, which obviously you cannot spend billions of dollars to get elected. There are limits on that. If you spend that money, that's illegal. So a lot of things are now in the open that people knew, but once it's in the open, you can no longer maintain the pretense, and then legal action is often necessary.
All right, I want to go into a third subject that we didn't plan on doing at this week, but Dani, as former Deputy Foreign Minister, I know that it's very important to you to say something about the Paris Peace Conference that's coming up this coming week. What are we expecting to see there? More Israel bashing?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it was the right decision and long-standing policy of Israel not to go into these international tribunals, because you know beforehand, at the outset even, what would be the ending, what would be the resolutions, all ganging up.
We're not
on
attending,
Israel.
right? We're not going to be there.
We're not attending this one, no, because it is a tribunal. It is really a kangaroo court.
A court?
So, absolutely. So in that respect, and we also know from all the past experience, decades, international conferences never achieved anything. Quite the contrary. It actually pushed peace further away.
But in this case, this is just before Trump is also becoming president. Yes. By next week, he'll be just days away from being the president of the United States. I don't even know if the United States, I guess they are going to attend because it's still the old administration. Do you see anything positive coming out from there? Maybe more Israel bashing, perhaps, coming from all sides?
First of all, I have a lot to say about countries like France and other European countries actually having the gall to think that they can solve problems of other people. I mean, seriously, France, other countries, they have so many problems of their own. They claim to be able to solve this issue.
Well, this is the biggest problem in the world. We all know that.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, and the other thing is, even once they're going into this issue, they don't get it. No Western power understands the conflict. They don't. They think it's about the settlements. They think it's about the borders. They don't understand that the Arab Palestinians have never backed down from their maximalist claims, that the right of return is the code word that Palestinians use for saying we want all of Palestine.
And we're out of time for today, but this is an issue I'm sure that's going to be back on the agenda next week, because the Paris Peace Conference will have taken place and we'll be able to discuss it and talk about some of the things they left out and some of the bashing they did of Israel. Sorry about the running out of time. We had good issues. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Dani Ayalon and Einat Wilf for being with us. I'm Steve Leibowitz, and this has been Israel Weekly.